It was a bright summer morning, July 7th, 1967. The breeze coming off the Atlantic danced through the open windows of a brand new yellow Camaro as it cruised along the scenic highway near Brooklyn, New York. Behind the wheel was 17-year-old Nancy McQuan. Blonde, bright-eyed, and full of life, Nancy was headed to work at her dad's office in Brooklyn, about an hour from her home in Long Island. She didn't mind the commute. She actually loved it. Her father had recently gifted her that Camaro, a symbol of independence, of being taken seriously. And this road, with its sweeping views of the beach and glimmering ocean, it was pure joy. As she rolled the window down, letting the salty air wash over her face, she took a deep breath and smiled. It should have been an ordinary day. But Nancy never made it to work. Just a few cars behind her, a police lieutenant was driving the same stretch of highway. Out of nowhere, he saw Nancy's Camaro swerve violently across the lanes. No warning, no brake lights. The car cut in front of oncoming traffic, barely avoiding a head-on collision, then slammed into a tree with bone-jarring force. The lieutenant pulled over immediately, heart-pounding, thinking maybe the girl had passed out or had a seizure. He rushed to the driver's side and found Nancy slumped over the steering wheel, her golden hair falling across her face. She wasn't moving, but she was breathing barely. He opened the door, gently called out to her, and she let out a soft moan. No blood, no obvious injuries. But something wasn't right. She wasn't speaking, just slumped, barely responsive. Maybe she was in shock. Maybe she was intoxicated. There was no smell of alcohol, no bottles in the car, no sign of a crash other than the mangled front bumper. Still, to be safe, the officer radioed for backup and requested an ambulance. First responders arrived and carefully lifted Nancy from the car. She was alive, but not for long. By the time she reached the hospital, doctors could see she wasn't drunk or under the influence. But something invisible was killing her. They pumped her with adrenaline, scrambled to stabilize her. But at 11:30 a.m., just 2.5 hours after the crash, Nancy was gone. Only later, when a nurse went to gently comb her hair, did they discover it a small, round, bloodless hole at the base of her skull. Nancy McQuan had been shot in the head. And no one, not the officer, not the paramedics, not the hospital, had seen it coming. Detective Albert Seidman was no stranger to the bizarre. Known across Brooklyn for his no-nonsense approach and relentless determination, he'd solved some of the city's toughest cases. But as he stood next to Nancy McQuan's mangled yellow Camaro, the sun beating down on the twisted metal, even he felt lost. Nancy was a model teenager. No enemies, no secrets. She wasn't running with a bad crowd. There was nothing about her life that would explain why or how someone would shoot her while she was driving down a public highway in broad daylight. The oddest part, there were no bullet holes in the car. Seidman examined the vehicle inch by inch. He crawled into the back seat, checked the dash, the doors, even the undercarriage. No shell casing, no shattered glass, no trajectory path. Nothing. It was as if the bullet had materialized from thin air. And then there was the police lieutenant, the one who'd been right behind Nancy when it happened. He told Seidman everything, how the Camaro had swerved out of nowhere, how he hadn't heard a gunshot, hadn't seen anyone around, hadn't noticed any fleeing suspects. For a bullet to end up in Nancy's head, it had to come from somewhere. But from where, over the next several hours, Seidman ordered his team to canvass the highway and the surrounding area. Every blade of grass, every guardrail, every rooftop balcony and window that had a line of sight on the road. If a bullet had been fired, there had to be a casing. There had to be a shooter. But the road turned up clean. It was like chasing a ghost. And yet Seidman couldn't shake one thought: this wasn't a rural back road. This was Brooklyn. Millions of people. Someone had to have seen or heard something. So he shifted tactics. Forget the shell casing. He needed witnesses. For the next 5 days, Seidman and his team fanned out across the borough. They knocked on doors, interviewed shop owners, talked to commuters, tourists, gas station clerks, dog walkers, anyone who might have been near that highway at 8:40 a.m. on July 7th. Leads came in, tips were followed, but all paths led nowhere. Every clue just dissolved into static. Until July 12th. That morning, Seidman called an impromptu meeting. He spread out a map of Brooklyn on a desk and circled several locations. "We're going back," he told his team. "Somewhere in here, someone saw something. They just don't know it yet." One of those circled areas was a small gas station tucked away 2 blocks from the scene of Nancy's crash. It was owned by a local man named Theodore Day. When detectives arrived, Theodore immediately knew what they were there for. "You're here about Nancy, aren't you?" he asked. His voice was heavy, troubled. Theodore had known the McQuan family for years. He'd watched Nancy grow up. He lived near the crash site. And as it turned out, he was out on his boat the very morning Nancy died. "I didn't see or hear anything," he said quickly, almost too quickly. "I was fishing on the water. Bit noisy out there, you know." The detectives nodded, asked a few polite follow-ups. But they didn't leave. Instead, they slowed down the conversation. "What time did you go out? Who else was out there? Did you notice anything unusual that morning?" And that's when it hit Theodore. He remembered. He remembered something that had felt so innocent, so routine, he hadn't even considered it relevant until that very moment. Theodore swallowed hard. His mind was racing. On the morning of July 7th, the same morning Nancy McQuan died, he had taken his boat out just off the coast. It was something he did often, nothing unusual. But that day, the water was calm, the sky was clear, and he decided to do a little target practice. He remembered bringing along his old hunting rifle. He didn't think much of it. He'd done this kind of thing dozens of times before. He'd grabbed an empty soda can, tossed it into the water about 50 feet from the boat, and aimed. He pulled the trigger. The shot missed. The bullet skipped off the surface of the water and zipped off toward the shoreline. It was a fluke, a weird ricochet. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, after all, it had happened so fast. He just chalked it up to a missed shot and went about his day. But now, sitting in front of 2 detectives, that stray bullet wasn't just a fluke anymore. It might have been a death sentence. He looked up. His face had gone pale. "Oh my God," he muttered. "I think I shot her." The room fell silent. Detectives immediately brought Theodore in for questioning. He was cooperative, even shaken. And everything he described matched the timeline, the boat, the location, the angle, the exact time Nancy had lost control of her car. The shot, investigators realized, had ricocheted in the most improbable way imaginable. The physics were astonishing. The angle at which the bullet struck the water had deflected it upward, not down, launching it more than 100 yards inland. And that just happened to be the very moment Nancy had rolled down her driver's side window. She had smiled, taken a breath of sea air, and then nothing. Medical experts confirmed that the entrance wound in the back of Nancy's head matched the caliber of Theodore's rifle. The bullet had lodged itself in her skull, causing a catastrophic injury without any external bleeding, a rare but possible result in certain gunshot wounds. That's why no one, not even the ER doctors, had initially realized she'd been shot. It took less than 48 hours to verify the story. But then came the question, does it murder? A grand jury was convened. Theodore was formally charged with homicide. But the case wasn't straightforward. There was no motive, no malice, no prior record. The act, though fatal, had been accidental. He hadn't even known the bullet had gone anywhere near the highway, let alone killed someone. He was just a man on a boat firing at a soda can. The jury deliberated for hours. They reviewed ballistic reports, weather conditions, even nautical maps. In the end, they reached a conclusion. No indictment. Theodore Day was not a murderer. What he did was reckless, yes, but it was not premeditated. It wasn't an act of violence. It was a tragic accident. He was fined $100 for discharging a firearm within city limits. And that was it. No prison time. No conviction. But the burden he carried, that was something else entirely. For the McQuan family, justice was a complicated word. On one hand, they were grateful for answers. The not knowing that had been the worst part. Watching their daughter crash without understanding why, burying her without closure, it was torture. But knowing it had all come down to a random ricochet, that the bullet had come from someone they knew, someone from the community. It didn't make it easier. Just different. In later interviews, Nancy's mother said the thing that haunted her the most was imagining that moment, Nancy driving down the highway, windows down, sun on her face, enjoying the wind off the sea. Maybe she had the radio on. Maybe she was singing. And then it all ended. In a flash. A moment of serenity shattered by something completely invisible. How do you protect your children from that? Detective Seidman would later say it was one of the strangest cases he'd ever worked. There was no motive, no crime scene, no suspect. Just a car, a girl, and a bullet from nowhere, he said. And somehow, that was enough to tear a whole family apart. It served as a chilling reminder that sometimes fate isn't cruel because of what people plan, but because of what they never meant to do at all.